and it was about a month after he died, and when we realized that this was the song that we should dedicate to Andy.
They had stood together through the whirlwind of fame, the crushing weight of criticism, and the unshakable bond of family. Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb were inseparable on stage, voices blending so perfectly they sounded like one. But on one summer night in 1979, something rare happened, something that had only happened a handful of times before. Because standing beside them, smiling, beaming, and singing, was their youngest brother, Andy. The four Gibb brothers, together, sharing the same stage, sharing the same light, and yet none of them knew it would be the last time. In that moment, the audience saw pure joy. But backstage, life was changing fast. Andy's career was on fire, but so were his personal struggles. The Bee Gees were riding their biggest wave of success, but feeling the first signs of exhaustion. The crowd that night thought they were watching a celebration. In truth, they were witnessing something far more fragile. The final moment these brothers would ever sing side by side. So why didn't Barry, Robin, or Maurice know this was goodbye? And what happened in the years after that made this night so haunting to remember? The answers would come, but not until it was far too late. If you love uncovering the hidden stories behind music's most unforgettable moments, subscribe to RetroWaves. We bring you the truths, the heartbreaks, and the nights that changed everything, told exactly as they happened. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is one you'll never forget. By 1979, Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb were at the height of their powers. The Bee Gees had conquered the charts with Saturday Night Fever, their harmonies dominating radio stations across the world. The brothers were global icons, selling out stadiums, breaking records, and redefining pop music. Andy Gibb, their youngest brother, was carving his own path. Unlike the others, he had never been part of the Bee Gees lineup, but he was no less a star. With hits like I Just Want to Be Your Everything and Shadow Dancing, Andy had become a sensation almost overnight. At just 21 years old, he had his own fan base, his own tours, and his own headlines. And yet, despite the fame, there was always the quiet question, would Andy ever join his brothers on stage? Not as a guest, but as an equal. On July 10, 1979, at the Oakland Coliseum in California, the answer came. The Bee Gees invited Andy to join them during their Spirits Having Flown tour. It was a moment for the history books. All four Gibb brothers, standing shoulder to shoulder, harmonizing like they had been born to do nothing else. The audience roared. Fans didn't just hear music. They felt the weight of history in every note. And for the brothers, it was magic. What none of them knew was that fate was already pulling them apart. In less than a decade, Andy would be gone, and Barry, Robin, and Maurice would carry that night like a photograph burned into memory. Beautiful, but impossible to relive. So what happened between that perfect night and the heartbreak that followed? The Oakland Coliseum was electric. Over 55,000 fans packed the venue, their cheers echoing into the warm California night. Barry, Robin, and Maurice had just delivered hit after hit from Spirits Having Flown, their falsettos soaring over the crowd. Then, in a move no one expected, Barry turned to the audience and smiled. "And now," he said, "our kid brother Andy." The roar was deafening. Andy walked on stage, microphone in hand, grinning like he belonged there, because in that moment, he did. This wasn't just a cameo, it was family history unfolding in front of tens of thousands. They launched into harmonies that made the crowd gasp. Four voices, bound by blood, blending as if they'd rehearsed it all their lives. But behind the smiles, Andy was already living a very different life from his brothers, one that was starting to spiral. Andy Gibb was not just the youngest Gibb, he was the youngest solo artist to have 3 consecutive U.S. #1 singles. By 1978, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, Love is Thicker Than Water, and Shadow Dancing had made him a superstar. But unlike Barry, Robin, and Maurice, Andy didn't have the protective cocoon of a group. He faced the press, the fans, and the industry alone. His tours were grueling. His personal life, tabloid fodder. Verified reports show Andy began struggling with depression and substance use as early as 1979. The same year, he walked on stage with his brothers in Oakland. At the time, though, no one thought the night would be rare. They assumed they'd do it again, but they never did. In the years following that concert, the Bee Gees focused on their own projects. They recorded Living Eyes, worked on soundtracks, and weathered the disco backlash. Andy kept releasing music, but cracks were forming. Verified interviews reveal that Barry often stepped in as a mentor, producing some of Andy's work and offering guidance. But even Barry admitted later that the brothers weren't together as often as they should have been. Careers pulled them in different directions, and private struggles created distance. And while the Bee Gees could always rely on each other for stability, Andy's safety net was thinner. By 1981, he was battling financial troubles, canceled gigs, and a declining public image. Then came the heartbreak that would make that night in 1979 so haunting to remember. Andy's personal challenges began to overshadow his music. In March 1988, just days after his 30th birthday, Andy Gibb died in Oxford, England, from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. According to his doctors, this was not caused directly by drug use, but years of substance abuse had weakened his system. Barry, Robin, and Maurice were devastated. In a BBC interview years later, Barry admitted, "We weren't there enough for him. We didn't see it coming." And in that moment, the Oakland night became something else entirely, not just a memory, but a final goodbye they hadn't recognized. Over the years, Barry has spoken with deep emotion about Andy. In multiple verified interviews, he has said he still dreams about him and thinks about what could have been. "If I'd known," Barry once reflected, "I'd have held him tighter." He has also admitted that the Bee Gees avoided performing as four because they wanted Andy to succeed on his own, a decision that now carries a bittersweet edge. That night in Oakland was never planned to be the last. But life doesn't always give warnings. There are few surviving recordings of that 1979 performance, but the photographs tell the story. Four brothers, arms around each other, smiling into the lights. Fans who were there still talk about the harmonies, how they seemed to float above the stadium. For Barry, Robin, and Maurice, that night became a frozen moment. Every time they performed afterward, Andy's absence was felt. And for Barry, the eldest, it became a constant reminder of how quickly time steals the people we think will always be there. When Maurice died in 2003 and Robin in 2012, Barry became the last surviving Gibb brother. In interviews since, he has often brought up Andy, not in the context of chart success, but in the context of that one night they stood together. Verified accounts show Barry rarely talks about the Oakland show in detail, perhaps because the weight of it is too heavy. But to fans, it's clear. The stage that night held more than music. It held love, history, and an unspoken goodbye. And that's why, decades later, the memory still hurts. It's easy to think of the Gibb brothers in terms of statistics: 220 million records sold, 9 U.S. number ones, decades of influence. But for Barry, Robin, Maurice, and Andy, the music was never just numbers. It was the sound of their shared history, the glue that held them together through extraordinary highs and heartbreaking lows. And that's why the Oakland Coliseum night mattered so much, even if they didn't realize it at the time. As the final notes of "You Should Be Dancing" rang out, the crowd's roar was deafening. Barry looked over to his left and saw Andy, microphone still in hand, laughing as the sea of fans jumped in unison. Robin gave a rare, full smile, and Maurice shot a quick glance to Barry, the kind brothers share when they're silently saying, "Can you believe this?" No one was thinking about how rare it was. No one was thinking about lasts. But years later, Barry would replay that exact frame in his mind over and over, that fleeting moment when all four brothers were united under the same lights. The Bee Gees returned to touring and recording after 1979, but Andy never performed with them on a grand stage like that again. He had his own world to manage, one filled with chart pressure, grueling promotional schedules, and the temptations that came with sudden fame. Verified reports confirm Andy's early 1980s were turbulent, brilliant moments of music overshadowed by canceled performances, publicized breakups, and health scares. Barry tried to guide him when he could. In interviews, Barry admitted he often felt torn, committed to the Bee Gees' relentless schedule while wanting to be the older brother Andy could lean on. But time has a way of running out quietly. On March 10, 1988, Barry got the call no one is prepared for. Andy was gone. He was just 30 years old. The official cause was myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart, and while doctors stated it wasn't directly caused by drugs, they acknowledged that years of substance abuse had weakened his system. For Barry, the news was more than a loss. It was a rupture in the story of his life. Suddenly, that night in Oakland wasn't just a happy memory. It became the final entry in a chapter he didn't know had ended. In a later BBC interview, Barry's voice trembled as he said, "If I'd known, I would have stayed in that moment longer. I would have told him things I didn't say." And the truth is, that's what haunts him. Not the absence of more performances, but the absence of more time. Looking back, there was no fight, no falling out, no deliberate decision that kept the four brothers from sharing the stage again. It was simply the way life unfolded. The Bee Gees had their tours, their albums, their constant reinvention to stay ahead of changing trends. Andy had his solo career, with all the pressures of being a young superstar in the public eye. There were moments, verified in interviews, when Barry thought about bringing Andy on stage again, but timing, logistics, and Andy's health always got in the way. It's one of those what-if questions that linger forever unanswered. After Andy's death, Barry, Robin, and Maurice each dealt with the grief differently. Maurice threw himself into studio work. Robin spoke about Andy in interviews, sometimes breaking into tears. Barry, the eldest, became more guarded. But when he did talk about Andy, the emotion was raw. And as the years passed, more loss followed. In 2003, Maurice died unexpectedly due to complications from a twisted intestine. The shock was crushing. Barry said, losing Maurice was like losing the glue that held them together. Then in 2012, Robin died from cancer, leaving Barry as the last surviving Gibb brother. By that time, the Oakland Coliseum night had transformed in Barry's mind. It was no longer just a great concert. It was a snapshot of the only moment when all four brothers, the entire Gibb family legacy, stood together before the world. Fans, too, have elevated that performance into near myth. Those who were there remember the way the harmonies wrapped around the stadium, how Andy's voice slid perfectly into the Bee Gees' blend. Some have said, and this is unverified, more fan lore than fact, that the applause lasted minutes longer than usual that night, as if the crowd instinctively knew they were seeing something rare. For Barry, the truth is simpler and heavier. In his own words, "I think about Andy all the time. I dream about him, and I wish we'd done more together. That's what stays with me." And maybe that's the bittersweet truth behind so many final moments. You don't always know they're final. You think there will be another tour, another song, another night to stand side by side. But sometimes the last time is just the last time. And you only realize it when it's far too late to change. That's why, even decades later, Barry keeps the memory alive. Not through grand public tributes, but in the quiet ways. A story shared in an interview, a fleeting mention on stage, or a private moment with family. Because in the end, the Oakland night wasn't just a performance. It was a symbol of what the Gibb brothers were at their best. 4 voices, one family, one night the world would never see again. And maybe that's why, when Barry closes his eyes, that's the moment that comes back, brighter, louder, and more alive than all the rest. What do you remember most about the Gibb brothers? Tell us in the comments. Your stories keep their legacy alive. And if you want more untold moments from music history, subscribe to RetroWaves, because behind every song, there's a night like this, one that changes everything forever.